All right, thanks, Amy. And if you all can find your reactions on your toolbar, you'll see the little hands clapping. I'd like to give a round of applause for Amy. You know, this event was actually supposed to be in person. COVID started at the launch of our center, and we've done a lot of pivoting to make sure that we can get the right information out to the right people at the right time. And so trying to do this event in a virtual way has been really exciting and really challenging. We've learned a lot about how to get information out in this virtual world. So thank you very much, Amy, and thanks, Mia, for being the go-to person for our technology. I'd also really like to thank David, because a lot of what you're going to see today, particularly this path right here, came from our conversations with OSEP, particularly David, around how do we talk about this? How do we really move forward? And what you'll hear throughout both days is this positive approach that we really have to be clear about our path. We have to make sure that it's feasible, it's fun, right? And it's using those resources and practices that we know that really help students move forward. And so I'm really excited to be here today. As Amy mentioned, I do serve in the director role, and I'm excited to be here in that role, but I also want to share that I'm here as a parent as well. I have two kids with disabilities who I adopted from the social service system. And so, you know, I've one with really severe behavioral and mental health disabilities and one with a really severe learning disability. And to me, this work is so critical to how we really think about the school experience for kids, right? Not just a particular type of kids or a particular type of setting, that really any kid with a disability served in any setting across the United States. And so I'm excited to share that. I also am a teacher and a previous K-12 teacher working with kids with disabilities. So I bring all of that passion and that excitement to this world, and seeing it all come together for a single path to progress is super exciting for me. And so I'm going to focus really on how do we ensure that every student is on the right path to progress. And you'll notice that we don't really define progress in our work, because it is, in a sense, dependent upon your local context, your students. But in general, we have some accepted ways of looking at progress for students. If you look at the regs, we talk around academic achievement as well as functional performance. And so as I'm moving through, you may see some references to the academic achievement part, and that's probably because it gets out more to the public. But our assumption is this idea of progress is this intertwining of students' academic success and functional performance that really helps them be a successful student, right? That ultimately graduates and as a successful adult. So that's really what we're looking at. I do want to just share a current reality, and you know, it's just something where we are. It's not meant to justify where we're going, but it is this reality about where students with disabilities are sitting within our academic achievement. Now, every year, states submit data to the federal government, and that is in a report that you can actually read that gives you sort of the pulse of overall education. And we've seen a lot of growth in some areas, but one of the areas we really haven't seen the most growth, or what we would expect, is around academic achievement. And so if we look at how students with disabilities are currently performing, we do see this persistent lower academic achievement than their peers without disabilities. And I just shared some 8th grade data, but we do see this across these major points of performance. And this is really concerning, because our assumption around providing special education, or IDEA, was to ensure that every student with a disability had the same opportunities for success as their peers without disabilities. In other words, they were not experiencing or benefiting from the core programming alone, the same as their peers, and as a result needed special education, right? And so our assumption of adding on that special education was meant to provide that opportunity that would be similar to their peers. So we would assume that most kids with disabilities would be performing at or above target, right? It doesn't mean they don't need special education if they're performing, but what it means is that they need that special education to perform at similar rates. And part of this misunderstanding around the role of special ed is that our expectations have maybe not been consistent across the country, right? Is that you'll sometimes hear, oh, well, he's in special education and that's why he's not performing, or he's in special education or has a disability and that's why he acts like that. We have to move away from that as we start to build this path for progress for students. And part of that is based on our beliefs, right? If our beliefs around our role in special education, our role as service providers or interventionists is not to maintain, right, or help kids, just be there. Really what we're trying to do is say we hold similar high expectations for all of our students. But the way that kids meet those expectations is really going to be unique to their needs, right? And we have this really great act called IDEA that allows us to provide these high quality services and, specially designed instruction and related services and our supplementary aids and our program modifications to ensure that students can achieve those high expectations if they have needs based on their disability. Now, tomorrow we have a panel, as Amy mentioned, that has educators, parents, but we also have this really great advocate, Billy Pickens, who you'll hear here in a second, who shares the importance of us setting these high expectations, that our beliefs, right, really dictate the opportunities that students have. And if you think back to your education, like what made the difference? It probably wasn't that intervention program or the curriculum that your teacher used. It always comes back to that educator who believed in you, who supported you, and pushed you to meet those expectations. And that's what Billy's going to share with us. So let me know if you can't hear it, but hopefully it's working. Did not work.
In this Stories from the Classroom video, Billy Pickens tells us how his teacher's high expectations for him may not have been welcome in high school, but that as an adult who is deaf-blind, he now appreciates how important it was for his future.
On the first couple of days of school, and I was young at the time, so I didn't recognize this, but teachers weren't really giving me the same work. In fact, in the beginning, I was placed in a special ed class, even though I had been mainstream throughout elementary school. And so their automatic assumption was that I needed to be in a special ed class. But they realized, oh, he kind of surpassed the class and what they were doing. So they put me back in mainstream. And then when I got mainstream, some of the teachers were very kind of hesitant about how to teach me. And so I definitely felt like at the time I was kind of not thinking much of it because they weren't really giving me work, and I guess I was fine with that because I was 12 and I didn't want work. But I think that later on I realized that there was a lot of under expectation, a lot of just wanting to pass me up and not really treat me the same way as my sighted peers.
One English teacher made a lasting difference for Billy's future.
He called a meeting and he was like, your writing is really good. And he was like, why are you in standard? You should be in honors with this kind of writing. And I said, well, I don't want to do the homework. And he was like, well, I can help that. You can stay in standard, but I'm going to give you honors level work. And so he kept me in standard. I thought he was joking, but then all of a sudden points get taken off, or commas here, and it got to the point where me, and my mom were all kind of butting heads about it because I need the class to graduate, and he was being extremely hard on me. But at the time, I didn't really like it because, like I said, I didn't want to do work. And later on, he told my mom, he was like, I know we can do it. I know we can do it. So I really gave it my all eventually, and I did pass the class and did well.
So what does Billy recommend for educators to promote progress for students with disabilities?
Leave your biases at the door and just walk in and see people as individuals. I know that sometimes it can be hard, and I understand that we're all kind of judgmental in some way at times. We all kind of look at people or have a first impression of people. But I think as a teacher, do your best to try to realize that anyone who walks in your classroom likely wants an education. They may not realize at that point because they may be young and just kids, but I think everybody genuinely wants to learn something. And so I think if you see that and see beyond what disability they have or what race they are or whatever it might be, I think that you can realize that at the end of the day, everybody wants to learn and everybody can learn.
Billy graduated from the University of North Carolina at Charlotte in 2020. He now works for the Exceptional Children's Assistance Center, leading the youth advisory team and youth newsletter, while developing his very own podcast series.
So I know somebody asked about a podcast, but that would be a really great one to follow. And I think Billy's message really resonates with me because I think about my own son, who I'll share here in a little bit, is it really had to be that one teacher. And it wasn't until he was in the 6th grade or 7th grade that one teacher really helped him believe that he could do it, because that teacher believed he could do it. Now, why this matters is that if we think about the current reality of our educational system, almost 70% of kids with disabilities spend the majority of their time accessing and participating in general education curriculum. So I know there's a lot of special education teachers here, and I think sometimes we might feel frustrated that we're not getting this, collaborative effort, but it really is around us coming together, right? That at least one teacher has to hold those expectations and to really be able to collaborate and communicate with that general ed teacher. When we look at the data, we know that almost all students with disabilities spend at least some portion of their day in the general education. And I think what this really resonates for us, what resonates for me and clarifies for us, is that students are all general education students, even though we might be thinking within our school what our role is. And I remember saying things like, oh, he's one of my special education students, or he's a special ed kid. Those things are where we need to think differently about our language, because what they promote is that it's my role as an individual to be able to support that student. And in reality, if we think about all of our students as general education students first, then we start to think more about a team really helping the student. And then if we sort of change our narrative that this is a general education student who also requires special education aids and services in order to get the biggest bang for their buck, right, out of general education, then we start to see this special education more as a positive benefit, right? It's the supplement to give this whole general education experience that allows students with disabilities their maximum benefit, right? To really build this path to progress. And if you've ever seen me chat before, I love sharing this quote. And it's because as a former special education teacher and a former general education teacher, you start to recognize that there's really no way that a single teacher has all the time and the knowledge and the skills to meet the needs of every kid in their class, not just a particular group of kids, but all of their kids, right? That we're sort of all in this together. And I want to also say that what's evolved for me over time is that there's also no single system. It's not general education's fault. It's not the state's fault or special ed, right? Like, it's not an entity's responsibility. It's that our systems are designed to really leverage all of these systems simultaneously so that we start to build what we will refer to as an ecosystem that allows teachers to be collectively effective, right? So sometimes we feel like we're in this isolation and we're working in a single system, and we recognize, right, that it's not working. We've got to step back and start to say, how do we build this sustainable ecosystem? And I think COVID really clarified for us this importance of sustainability, because if you're like me, you may have a couple more gray hairs this year because it just seemed like we were on overdrive all the time. So what we're trying to do is leverage all of the parts of the system to build something that's sustainable, that allows our teachers, the leaders, the educators, the service providers in that school to be able to develop and implement high quality educational programming for all students, right? Including students with disabilities. And what we're seeing is this need for a collective efficacy, right? That we have to be collectively effective, not just one teacher who's effective or one grade that's effective. But in order for us to really maximize the benefits of schooling, we need to have this collective effect. Now, that's not a lot of mumbo jumbo. There's actually a lot of research that is supporting this. And I want to share that this underlying piece of collective teacher efficacy is this collective belief, right? That we have this ability to positively impact students. And it goes back to kind of what Billy was saying in the video, is that sometimes our teachers and our leaders and our service providers don't feel like they can do it, right? They don't believe they have the knowledge or the skills or the resources or the money. And because of that, we often don't see the progress. But ultimately, we all can make a difference. I think about my husband, who's like a classic non-educator. He was in the, he's an engineer, and under COVID, he believed that only I could do the teaching because I had the degree. But to be honest, he also had the skills and knowledge. He knew the student he was working with. He knew the content area, like he knew how to do multiplication facts, right? And once he started to believe that he could do it, he then started to see that impact. And he was excited, not just my son who was excited, but he was excited. And that excitement is what drives us to education, right? It's our belief that we can make a difference, and that evidence, right? That's like, yeah, I impacted that student. I can see that growth occurring, right? That's the excitement. And if you're like me, you're probably getting tingly and you're like, oh my heck, I can't wait to start the school year. But while that seems like, just this belief and seeing the impact, we know that that makes the difference, right? And if you're familiar with Hattie's work on effect sizes, we generally say like a 0.4 is equivalent to a year's growth. This collective belief within our school, within our system, that we can do it has a effect size of 1.57, right? That's huge. We didn't have to purchase anything for that. We just have to come together and really have this strong collective belief that we can do it, implement what we think is going to work, and then start to look at that data and make those changes. And know that maybe sometimes we don't pick the right thing. That's okay. Right? But if we continue to believe we can do it, we'll try the next thing. And that really is at the heart of specially designed instruction, right? That comes with special education. And a way to really facilitate this is we're seeing we got to start asking the right questions. When we think about the wrong questions, there are things like, what's wrong with that kid? What's wrong with that teacher? What's wrong with those parents? That gets us to focus on the wrong part, and we try to fix the wrong part. But it doesn't necessarily mean fixing that wrong part is the right thing to do, because we don't know where we're going. And that's where the path has to start. And the path And this collective efficacy starts with the right questions. And the first one is here, and I'm going to give you a chance in the chat box to share. But think about what it is you want for your students that you work with. When you move into this next year, what is it that you want? What is it that you want for your families? This question and how we respond to it is really what determines whether we have high expectations for kids and whether we're thinking about the big picture. Now, as you're writing, I'll just share a brief little story, is that when I was a parent, I was sitting, it was second grade, and I was sitting with my oldest, who, as I mentioned, has very severe behavioral and mental health concerns. I mean, he was in a mental facility for a period of time due to PTSD and trauma. And I think about when we were sitting at the meeting, and the facilitator said to the teacher, "What do you want for the student?" And she said, "I just want him to not disrupt class, right? I want him to sit in his chair, and I want him, to do his work." And I thought that was interesting. And then she turned to me and she said, "Well, what do you want?" And I said, "I want my kid to be able to be a successful adult. I want him to have a job. I want him to have friends. I want people to care about him." And that, sorry, I'm getting a little teary-eyed. But that is that sort of focus on how we have to look at our work. If we don't clarify what we want, we start to look at the things we want to change that are interfering with the progress for students. And instead, we've got to think about this big picture. So I see that I want my students to make a positive impact. Oh my heck, I think about that all the time. They understand their strengths and their needs and be able to advocate. We want kids to feel good about themselves. We want them to feel happy, excited. Part of that is the instructional piece, right? Their academic success. We want them to graduate. But really, if we think about what we want for kids, it's this experience, right, that is helping us be better, helping us contribute to being better. Thank you all for sharing these. And I hope that as you move into your IEP meetings, and maybe you're doing the next session, is think about every IEP meeting. Well, probably you need to start well before the IEP meeting is, what do you want, right? What's the big picture? We're probably, I will say it took my kid about 6 years before he was able to sort of stabilize where his skill set is, but we were all on the same path, right? We were all thinking big picture about where we were going. I can see that feeling safe and enough to try. Oh my heck, that is a big deal. I want kids to feel safe, right? To be able to fail and learn about themselves and experience, right? Great, we'll keep them coming. So once we have that sort of what we want for our kids, then we can start to say, what is the current reality, right? So I think about my son in the second grade, and I understood at that point in time, he lacked a lot of the basic knowledge and skills necessary. Luckily, he still had time, right? Because he's not going to graduate for about, 10 more grades. But that current reality is where we start to think about the present levels, right? Is where is this student at? And that present level says, this is where we currently are. This is where we want to be. What does this student need and the family need in order to help this student move there? And that second grade teacher, right, is just part of this collective benefit, right? They're not doing everything, but they're part of that big picture. And then when we think about the IEP itself, right, all the stuff that goes in it, the services, where we're at, that really comes later. Because if we've clarified the current reality, where we want kids to be, and what are their needs now, right, moving forward, then we can think about how we maximize it. If we start with the last question first, we get really hung up on what do we do, right? What do we purchase? What's there? And as a person who's worked in the field for almost 30 years, that's often the question I get. And I say it's the wrong question, right? It's not what program you're going to use. It's that, do you know your student enough? Do you know where they're going to even think about what's necessary to help the students succeed? So as Amy mentioned at the beginning a little bit, the center was really around this idea of how do we promote appropriate progress in response to the Andrew F. decision? And the Andrew F. decision, it's not that we've not done this, right? It's not like IDEA was doing it wrong before and now it's different, but it really clarified and put a spotlight on what we need to be thinking about, right? And we have to think about the programming, the high quality programming we provide. Is it reasonably calculated, right, to help that student move from their current reality to where our vision is for their success, right? So we don't define what progress is in IDEA. That's really part of the team, and that based on your high expectations. But we think about, what does this kid need given their current reality in light of their circumstances, right? I mean, I could have the same expectation for both of my students, both of my kids in the second grade, but their current realities, their circumstances were completely different, right? So the program we provide is going to be different. So the way that the center is functioning right now is trying to simplify, as David mentioned, what is it that we want to focus on? How do we make this sustainable? How do we make this feasible? And part of it is we need to be really good about our development, right? We know there's a lot of research, there's a lot of federal investment, research. I know there's a lot of faculty members on here. We know what works, but how do we get that into practice so that we're able to see the gains? Because the design doesn't have the effect. It's the implementation piece, right, that really results in the benefit. So the IEP is part of that development, but the implementation, as Amy mentioned, right, is what moves us to the progress that we expect to see. Now you'll see here we do use the multiplication sign, because you can't just have one without the other, right? We have to have good design development, and we've got to have good implementation for that. And that's something that's actually outlined in the law itself. And I want to, just sort of reinforce this idea of free, appropriate public education. As Amy mentioned, you'll see it highlighted in all of our sessions. That's ultimately the goal, right, of IDEA, is to provide that. And it's good for us to be clear about what it means. And so if you think about the way we've previously functioned, we've really had a lot of focus on this procedural piece, right? Like, what goes in the IEP? How do we write it? What forms do we use? What boxes do we check? That part is important, because the design of it was not willy-nilly. Somebody, based on our research and our learning over the last 45 plus years, is we know that there are critical features. And in fact, there are 7 of them that are necessary for us to develop an IEP that, if implemented, is going to produce growth. And that's really what the substantive piece that was clarified by Andrew is, the so what, right? If we take this really procedurally well-designed IEP, does it matter for the kid, right? Like, do we see this internal consistency, which Dr. Chrissy Brown and Amy Peterson and myself will be talking about in the IEP session? Are we designing it in a way that allows us to make claims that this is going to help this student meet the needs outlined in their plan? Something else that's emerging, and you'll hear some of this as well in the due process law session tomorrow, is this idea of implementation. And we don't really see, we assume that it's there, right? But we don't see an effect from an IEP. It's a piece of paper. It sits on the desk, right? The effect is this last part. Now, to help you sort of get a sense about what this looks like, and this is something we've learned, as Amy mentioned, we have our intensive sites, and then we have our universal TA, and we do some iterative cycles of learning of how do we communicate this message. And one of them, with the help of our project officer, is a bike. Now, you can just give me a show of hands. How many of you have a bike? How many of you know what a bike is? And I would assume that most people in our country know what a bike is, right? And you know that there are critical pieces to a bike. Every bike has wheels, it has some sort of framing structure, it has handlebars. There are some things that don't have brakes or do have brakes, but we know that there are critical parts to a bike. You can think about the IEP in the same way, right? That an IEP has these individual parts that we design, right? And I think about an IEP, there are 7 parts, in case you're wondering, or maybe you get quizzed about it at some point, but there are 7 critical parts to an IEP, right? It has present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. It's got goals, it's got a monitoring plan, a statement, right? So there are pieces. And we have previously focused on the getting each of those pieces really well. So like if you're a biker, maybe you're really into biking, you want a super fancy seat, right? But most of us don't really think about a bike in its individual parts, right? I don't. I just buy a bike and it comes with all of the parts. And that's really where we think about the substantive piece. We can have really fancy parts, but if those parts don't fit together, they don't create a vehicle, right? And if you think about the IEP as this vehicle for progress, it needs to be able, all those parts, right, to be able to work together. So you've got your assessment that's driving the baseline and your present levels. That aligns to your, SDI and the monitoring plan. Your SDI is helping the student progress on their goals, and your monitoring plan is determining that, right? So if you think about the IEP as this bike or this vehicle, it allows the student to move forward, right? That it's designed as a vehicle. Now, I'll talk about this in a second, but if you're like me, you might have a bike in your garage that has a lot of dust on it and maybe doesn't get used. So it's not just the vehicle itself, right, that really helps us promote progress or move forward, but it is a critical piece of it. And we know that, bikes, just like IEPs, are not the same. And this is where we start to refine different parts of it to make it work for me. COVID was really hard on me, so I need a little bit bigger seat, right? Or I got really short legs, so I need smaller wheels. But ultimately, the parts, are the same. So we're starting to individualize those parts based on that student's current reality. So what great is an IEP if it doesn't get implemented? And that's why I was mentioning that part about it. And what we're finding in the case law is that there really are 2 ways of thinking about that implementation. One is the fidelity, which Dr. Stephen Prater will talk about next tomorrow. And I can't remember who else is on that session, but really, what do we need to do to put that in place? A big acronym that we're seeing is it fair, right? Is it feasible? Is it acceptable to the team? Is it likely to create that impact? And is it relevant for the student? So that fidelity is the extent to which we put in those practices. The other thing, and this may be more of a concern for folks moving into this year, is our capacity to implement, right? And that's, do our staff have the knowledge and skills to be able to implement that IEP? So when we think about the development, it's not that we're developing IEPs based on our context, but we have to be developing IEPs that can be implemented to get students to that growth, right? Ultimately, the growth, the outcome is what we're looking for. So we've kind of illustrated this into this path to progress, right? That we have our IEP and it really is our vehicle. But unless we set that IEP up, like Billy mentioned, in an environment in which it's going to allow the student to make progress, we're not going to see those gains, right? And our evidence over time has really clarified a couple of key elements that are what we need to be focusing on to develop that sustainable ecosystem. That first one, which is probably not surprising, is educator support. Are we providing coaching, staff time for, teachers to do their professional development, time for them to be able to teach with the right resources? This is really around the extent to which we're meeting educators' needs so that they can be their best self, their collective benefit, right, from that teaching experience. Something tomorrow we'll talk about, and Ties will be here this afternoon if you want to start the conversation today, is this idea of belonging. There's been a lot of work around inclusion, But what we've seen is that there's been more of a focus on physical inclusion, or making sure kids are getting just access to the curriculum. And if you read back of what people want, they want more than that, right? We want our kids to feel like they're part of the school community. They're part of the experience of school. And that's really where belonging is, taking it a step further. And we've identified 10 dimensions that help folks promote belonging within your school. Effective instruction, probably not surprising. Something else we've done with the help of some researchers across the country is identify those evidence-based high leverage practices, right, that are necessary for the design and delivery of specially designed instruction. As we mentioned, if we don't actually provide that instruction, we don't see the benefits. Family engagement, which we'll also be talking about tomorrow, is really a critical piece. And as a parent myself, I think about the burden that schools often feel to do everything. In reality, it is a collective effort. I'm working with the school. We're creating this overall opportunity to ensure that my kids can succeed given their current reality. And finally, that last was ongoing teaming, and it also includes the data components of it, is that we have time to really be able to specially design, right? A single teacher cannot do that. I'll just say that right now. It is a collective effort. It's our deeper understanding of the student, and it's our understanding, leveraging our collective expertise to design something that this student needs at this time. So that teaming is a really critical piece. And we have some resources, not just on our website, but also in the National Center on Intensive Intervention around facilitating effective teaming. So I'll close my session. I can't really not talk about MTSS, but I will say that, and that's because we know that most schools are implementing some sort of tiered system of support. And this is a great way, that sustainable ecosystem that we're trying to develop for students. Your MTSS system is a great way to leverage those supports, right? And if we think about the tiers that exist, kids with disabilities also benefit from tiers of support, right? Not all kids with disabilities need intensive instruction. You know, some kids would benefit from supplementary aids and services or co-teaching at the tier 1 level, right? So we think about this as an infrastructure that we can leverage to really promote a sustainable ecosystem for students. And just clarifying this idea that all kids, right, are benefiting. All kids are getting what they need within our school. And that system that we have in place allows us to do that as kids' needs change. And just an example, I will say that my oldest son probably needed very intensive supports his first 3 years of school. It's just kind of the reality. But as he was able to self-advocate and gain the skills, he actually is doing very well in a tier 1 setting with very limited supports. And in fact, like Billy, he's a really prolific writer, and it became part of his way to deal with his emotions. And so we think about this system, and special ed is not one opportunity, but really leveraging the overall school system to provide kids what they need when they need it. So before I close up and we open it up for some questions and get you ready for your next one, I just want to bring you back to these questions because they've really helped clarify for me and the teams that I work with where we go. It's going to be a bit of a challenging year, I suspect, and we have to keep our focus on what's most important. And that's that first question: what do we want for our students and our families? We have to start our conversations, right? Before we even start filling our toolboxes, what is it that we want? What will be successful this year, right? If I was to say I was a great teacher, what would it look like? Once we've clarified that, it allows us to start developing our collective belief that we can move our students to that's where we want them to be. We have to be honest about our current reality. We cannot use it as an excuse or a rationale for why kids can't do something. It just is the reality that we're working with. And sometimes maybe we don't know how to do it, but gosh, look at all the people on this call today. You've got the center, you've got the U.S. Department of Ed. We're literally all in this together. So we can leverage each other to really figure out how do we do something for this kid in this circumstance at this time, right? And then we can start to clarify those needs and what we're going to do for our kids moving forward. And I will say something that we've learned, and you'll hear this in the next session around IEPs, and you'll see it within our resources, is that present level statement or present levels of academic achievement and functional performance is where those first two bullets should be. So if a student moves to another school or moves to another teacher, we still know what we want for the student. We know what that current reality is, because with that information, a teacher can then really understand the needs and then be able to design the system to help the student address those needs. Now, I know I've talked a lot, and I will say in the other sessions, there are more engagement, but we really just want to start off with saying, we can do this, right? Collectively, we're all in this together. Somebody knows, and we just have to start to leverage those resources, whether they're free federal resources, the great resources from your state or your district, or your colleagues or the family, and even the student, I think, can help us understand where we need to go. So I wasn't able to watch the chat box a lot, but and I know I only have about 2 minutes, but if you have questions, you can put those in the chat box. I know that I also have a session in the networking time around the IEP or the SDI. So if you want to engage in conversations with that, feel free to chime in. I will say I won't tell you the answer, because this is really us leveraging our expertise. You know your student, you're likely to be the best expert for that kid. So thanks, Julie. All right, Amy.
Any questions for Tessie before we turn it over to just some final reminders about kind of where you can find some of the materials, and then we'll send you on your way for a short break.
Yeah, and I will say, I just noticed that Claire mentioned, around getting the PDF for the slideshow, we will, as a federally funded center, we will have these things available so that you can share the same message, right? And I think that's really where, if we're all on the same page and we're moving in the same path, it makes it a lot easier that as we move into this next school year with this different circumstances, right, that are going to be there. So.
Hi, Tessie, this is Val, and I joined a little late, but what parts I did take on, they've been wonderful. I'm texting out already saying, folks, I'll get copies of this presentation. When I keyed on, it said recording in process. So will the recordings be there as well, along with the PowerPoint PDF?
Oh, Tessie,
everything that you will hear and see over the next 2 days, you will have access to. And so Amy will confirm before we move forward, but the recordings, the 508 PowerPoint presentations, and the transcripts will all be available, as well as every resource that we reference in our sessions.
Well, wonderful. Thank you.
Good.
Yeah, so Tessie, if you move over to the next slide, I think.
Okay, I see Becky just put a question. I want to make sure I respond to it. Is what strategies that have I found helpful for bringing student voice to the IEP? If you are interested, please attend the belonging session. We actually have video of helping students be part of that process. And there's some great resources, but I think the strategies that are in the belonging handouts and work are really where we've allowed students to be a voice, not just like as a sidebar. Because I mean, I've been in the field for a long time, and we used to do, I will say student-led IEPs is great, but there needs to be some front work, and that front work is in that belonging session, Becky. All right. Well, I want to thank you all, and I look forward to continuing the conversations, and I'm going to pass it over to Amy to get us started.